There are millions of new users on ChatGPT when they release their image generation software, and that receives some press from as far as like, oh, is this green for the environment? But at the same time, that's growing just because of adoption. It's a little bit different, in my view, than growing because of building. And so really coming back to the theme, or what I believe is a theme of one of the main themes of today, is the scaling in terms of the model building or the model training. And so there, it's things like DeepSeek showing that, hey, you can do this a lot smarter instead of just burning more fuel or burning more watts to build your model, watt hours to build your model.
Welcome back to Let's Turn the Tide by Veolia and Middle East. I'm your host, Nadine Zidani, and we are continuing our special AI series, a collaboration with Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi, where we bring you thought-provoking conversations at the intersection of AI and sustainability. Today, we explore a new area of AI that you may or may not have heard of, green AI. The movement to make artificial intelligence more energy efficient, transparent, and aligned with our climate goals. To explore this topic, our guest today is Dr. Samuel Feng, Assistant Professor of Mathematics at Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi and researcher at the Sorbonne Center for Artificial Intelligence. He teaches in a mathematics program focused on AI applications and conducts research on building efficient, interpretable models that tackle real-world challenges, from decision-making and healthcare systems to sustainability and infrastructure. Samuel, welcome to Let's Turn the Tide.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. And we are very excited about this collaboration with Sorbonne University Abu Dhabi. So I want to start our conversation with, when we think of AI today, what comes to mind immediately is, the large language models like ChatGPT and Gemini. Can you briefly explain how these models work and why do they need so much energy?
Sure. That's the question of the hour, I think. So the one thing about models is I tend to find that the general public doesn't really understand them very well. And there are kind of two important concepts that are usually missed. And that's the distinction between training or model building and what we'll call today serving. Serving is what happens when you pull out your phone and you download ChatGPT or Gemini and you give it a prompt and it gives you something back, and it's starting to get really, really cool and exciting to do that, right? But training is kind of like the entire factory of tech people, data centers, large computational clusters that are needed to build these modern large language models. And that ends up being really, really important for our conversation today in the context of green AI.
And we don't talk enough actually about training.
Yeah.
We put a lot of emphasis on the usage of AI, but not on training the models.
That's exactly right.
So when it comes to the energy demand, so I guess, the more, AI is evolving, and it's evolving quite fast, the more energy we will need actually to feed, these machines. Do you have any figures in mind and perhaps, comparison that kind of help us to understand the scale of it?
Sure, yeah. I mean, so the thing that's really exploding exponentially is the size of the amount of energy needed in order to train the most modern models. So as an example, GPT-3, which was a few years ago, at least according to a figure, it was around 1,300 megawatt hours of energy was needed to train it. That means to just build the model. We're not even talking about the cost it is for many users to use that model, but just to build it, it took about 1,300 megawatt hours. So that translates to about 120 modern homes annual power usage. Okay, so you build it once, and now you have a model, and then from that model, people can use it, and when they use it, that's a lot less power. I can give you a figure on that in a second. But then, fast forward 5 years later, or 4 years later, to GPT-4, which is what most of us carry in our pockets right now, or at least access to it. That took at least according to some estimates, around 60,000 megawatt hours. So we're talking about a 50-fold increase in just a few years. And just to translate that into homes, that's around 5,500 to 6,000 homes a year. So right now, that's still, okay, 5,000 homes, that's a lot. But it's the fact that this scaling, this growth, shows no signs of slowing down. And how many more doublings and how many more 50 times growths can happen before we start running into serious issues of where is that power going to come from? Does that mean we are going to start, burning more fossil fuels or anything that we are hoping that won't happen just to serve that hungry computational power needed to build these models? And of course, the fact that there's such a big political competition and international competition of different companies competing for who's biggest, who's best, who's winning, that kind of drives the desperation even more to kind of use whatever sources are necessary to build that next best model. So that's kind of the context of the training side of it that I find really interesting, first of all, just as an academic to think about, but also a little bit concerning or very concerning given where we might be in just a few years' time.
And that's just for one model.
Exactly.
You took the example of ChatGPT, yes. But nowadays we have, I don't know how many models around the world.
Exactly. So that's a really, really good point. So OpenAI, who developed GPT, they're training dozens of models. You talk to any employee who's currently working there, they only release certain models to the public once they're kind of production ready, but they're always building. They're always building. And that's just one of many companies. You've got Meta, you've got Anthropic, you've got DeepSeek, you've got many companies around the world who are building these really, really large models and using lots and lots and lots of power.
Yeah. You mentioned DeepSeek, and I think we had a conversation about that before the recording the podcast. And I want to come back to it because it was kind of a breakthrough, in this AI, world a couple of months ago. So, and I want to share with you a couple of figures because I've been doing some research and I was quite interested about it. So apparently to train DeepSeek, they needed 55 days using around 2,000 GPUs that cost around $5.6 million US. In comparison, GPT-4 that you mentioned, they used 10,000 GPUs and cost between 60 to 100 million US dollars. Why does it matter? And what does it tell us about energy use in AI?
That's great. And to add on to that, DeepSeek as a model is also more efficient to serve. That second half of modeling, training, serving that we haven't talked about yet. But yeah, I mean, that was a good example, I think, of maybe what we hope will happen in this AI race, which is as the resources get more constrained, then the scientists and the architects are forced to be more efficient. But basically, that's exactly it. So DeepSeek, they were able to build into their architecture ways of being more energy efficient. Well, their goal wasn't energy, but their goal was just the simple fact that they didn't have 10,000 GPUs lying around and they wanted to be competitive. So what do? They have to innovate. That's the type of innovation that I think is really exciting. And that, I think, is the core innovation of the DeepSeek model. That and the fact that they released it. So it's actually open, unlike what OpenAI does. But they also released it. So for the scientific community, it was also a huge breakthrough. They could actually use this model in other domains. But as far as the efficiency, it was a complete order of magnitude, multiple orders of magnitude improvement.
So today, this is the most energy efficient model that we know in the world?
So you have to be more nuanced. You can build a model that's, or the trade-off here is between performance and efficiency. So DeepSeek's performance was very close to that of GPT-4. GPT-4, maybe it's a little bit better, but it's the fact that it used 50 times less energy to get there, that was the real breakthrough. So as far as models that have that level of performance, yes, DeepSeek was the most efficient by far. At least that's ever been published. You never know what's happening behind closed doors at these companies.
Interesting. So, as the demand for AI grows, I mean, as we can imagine, so does the need, of course, for data centers, and of course, energy consumption to, cool and run, these data centers. Can you explain us a bit more the environmental impacts of, today's AI infrastructure in the world?
Yeah, I mean, so um, data centers, you can actually break down. There are a few different resources they use. The most obvious one is power, and you can read in the news even the big companies, Microsoft, for example, they've invested in building a nuclear power plant just to fuel its future expected need for energy, for power. And a lot of other companies, Meta notably, they've done similar types of things. You even read kind of fantastical stories of people trying to build data centers in space in order to cool them, all sorts of things. And so, yeah, data center usage, it's projected to be really, really big by 2030. Some estimates are talking about data center usage will be that of maybe the 5th largest economy in the world, like something like a country like Japan or something like that. That's how big it will be if, as far as power consumption, if we continue this scaling. And there's no reason to think this scaling will stop given the current incentives for companies to keep pushing. But the other thing that we don't want to forget about is the water consumption. The vast majority of these data centers, many of these data centers are water cooled. Now they don't have to use potable water, right? They can use gray water in order to do their cooling, but that's still a lot of water. And I think I was reading some figures where the amount of water used by a large data center now might be in the hundreds of millions of liters per year. So that's a considerable amount. Yeah, it's a considerable amount. And again, with the growing amount of data, that's yet another burden on the infrastructure of delivering all that to a specific site. That's all it is. It's just a bunch of computers.
And it's not going to slow down.
Yeah, that to me is the most concerning thing, is that nobody in this game has any incentive to slow down because there's so much political pressure to win, to have the next biggest model. We're expecting a DeepSeek 2 to drop pretty soon. Oh. And we're all looking at, are they going to get performance gains by increasing their consumption as well? I mean, given how successful they were beforehand, they received a bunch of funding to buy a bunch more computers if they so choose to use that for that. So who knows? But yeah, that scaling is the big thing. Because when it comes down to it, the resources consumed boils down into, you can consider maybe two parts. There's the size of the model, which is bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's been growing for decades now, actually. And then there's the amount of data. So if you have more data, you can even have the same model size, but you're still going to use a lot more compute because you have to process all that data to learn the model, to build the model.
And this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Because I guess we need more and more data to be, even more, reach good performance.
Exactly. And I mean, kind of the scary thing or the concerning thing is the models that we have now, they're ChatGPT 4, for example. It basically, you can think of it as almost took into consideration all the text data we have. And that's around maybe 2 terabytes worth of data. If you take all the books that have been written, all the text data, it's not that much. Like 2 terabytes, it's a lot, but it's not that much. If you go to the current models, they're trying to now bring into images, right? You see multimodal, you see diffusion models and things like that. And there's probably a couple hundred times that in the world already with Instagram photos and everything. But for example, video data really has not been used to train any large language model right now. That's the frontier. But there's petabytes and petabytes of data waiting there to be used. So there's no limitation for data. So there's no limitation on what's available. It's just a limitation of, can we put it in there? Can we grow our compute to be wide enough to just eat all that data? That right now, unfortunately, means that we just need to build a bigger data center to use all of that and consume more. Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the scale of things, it's pretty crazy. I mean, it is a big engineering feat to get that many computers to talk together and work together and to build a model, right? But yeah, the consumption is really something else.
Now, if we want to think how to reduce the carbon, the environmental footprint of AI, what are, in your view, some concrete strategies or innovation that can help these models to be, more energy efficient? What can we do?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, I think this is a good time to talk about the serving part, the other half of what happens with models and LLMs. I've seen a lot of misinformation out there about this. So if you were to suppose you're a regular ChatGPT user, maybe you use it a couple times a day, and you would get maybe, I don't know, a few thousand words a day from ChatGPT. The amount of energy that uses, according to kind of a back of the envelope estimate, literally I did this calculation this morning, would be something like charging your smartphone once.
It's not that much.
It's not that bad. Yeah. I mean, and so, especially given the amount of benefit you might get from that, because I do believe that this technology can really accelerate a lot of really good projects around the world. That's really not the limitation factor. Now, if you start having millions of people doing that, again, it can add up. But at the same time, it's benefiting millions of people directly, right? And so for me, there are gains to be had in terms of making the models themselves more energy efficient, meaning instead of maybe, so GPT-4, for example, an estimate is maybe 1 watt hour per, we measure this in tokens, but per 1,000 tokens, it's about like 700 words delivered. It's like 1 watt hour, for example. You can work on building models that instead might only cost half a watt hour per 1,000 tokens delivered. So that's one way to decrease it. But the thing is, that's really not suffering from the same type of scaling. It's suffering from scaling. There is a lot of consumption. There are millions of new users on ChatGPT when they release their image generation software. And that receives some press from as far as like, oh, is this green for the environment? But at the same time, that's growing just because of adoption. It's a little bit different, in my view, than growing because of building, right? And so really coming back to the theme, or what I believe is a theme of one of the main themes of today, is the scaling in terms of the model building or the model training. And so there, it's things like DeepSeek showing that, hey, you can do this a lot smarter instead of just burning more fuel or burning more watts to build your model, watt hours to build your model. But I think the hardest thing is changing those incentives. I really don't have direct answers for you. I wish I did. There are efforts happening right now. So for example, there's a French website called Hugging Face. That's where all the latest models are uploaded if they're to be released. And they do provide, for example, like an energy score for those. Little things like that are helpful. I'm in academia. I personally think that there should be more prestige and more respect given to researchers working on making models more efficient, even though the performance might not increase. Right now, though, there's still just so much emphasis on be more accurate, perform better, almost at any cost. And that frenzy is kind of what's driving everything.
And it feels like a market pressure, nowadays, because it's all about, at the end of the day, all of those companies are businesses, and they have investors and targets also to reach. So
that's exactly it. And I mean, and I hope I can communicate this well, but and the way forward, there's an easy way forward. It's pretty straightforward. If you're a company and you have, your data center, if you have, 5,000 GPUs and you build your model, all of the evidence points down to the only thing limiting you from doubling your model performance, or making your model, doubling isn't the right word, but making your model better, is just buying more GPUs and just growing that. And it's hard when there's such a simple solution dangled in front of a company or a corporation not to just take that as their path forward. We have the data already. We have the mathematics, the algorithms already there.
It feels like, we have to reach a tipping point to finally step back and kind of rethink the way we are building those models. I have no idea when it's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, there are some other good initiatives. I know at least last year, before the current administration, there were some, in the United States, there were some efforts in terms of, well, if you have these companies and they want to then grow their own power supply, right? So for example, Microsoft was incentivized to buy nuclear there, which is a lot cleaner than a lot of other alternatives. And that is something, if there was government intervention, I think it could work as far as, hey, if you're going to train your models, let's be sure they're going to be done as renewable as possible. And that's part of the advantage of the training part, because that is a very predictable, localized usage of power. So we know exactly where that power needs to go. And so if societies can start building more renewables around that, that can be another thing that can hopefully help the burden.
So the topic of this episode is green AI. And listening to you, I'm like, I want to ask you the question, is it really realistic to envision a future where AI is truly green? Or is it like more of a principle or something we hope to reach, I don't know, in the next, 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, so right now it's definitely not. And so to define some terms, I mean, you have green AI, and there's a community that termed something called red AI, which is basically building AI regardless of what's fueling it. Okay, and so right now, the simple fact that, at least in the conferences I go to or whatever, this is not a conversation. I trained my model. Well, what percentage of that power came from renewables? That's just not a question that happens in NeurIPS or in ICML or any of these big conferences that are driving the innovation. And so that means it's red right now. Green AI would mean that the greenness of the technology is a central part of the conversation. I think that would be the first step to us even being able to call that green AI. I don't think it's hopeless, but as I'm sure you understand better coming from the corporate world, I do think it takes a change in incentives, right? So, a good case scenario would be if, as the scaling happens and then there isn't enough available power to be delivered from the current grid, and companies are forced to innovate kind of like in a DeepSeek direction to build or train in a much more energy efficient way. And if the future gains can be found through that, that would be great.
And it's not complicated to measure, nowadays. You mentioned the corporate world, they have, targets, climate targets, they have sustainability measures. It's not far-fetched. I mean, it's not complicated to put in place and have, also targets, on the energy consumption, used by AI. And I heard, lately I was also at a conference, and I heard that one of the big players, in the tech world, like completely exploded its targets, its sustainability targets, because of investment in AI. So they were on track to net zero in the next 10 years, but we were very open about it because we invested in AI. Well, now we are definitely not on track, to reach our targets.
Yeah, I mean, that boils down to a little bit of some other stuff that I've worked in with renewables is, right? The problem with most of our renewables is they are inherently stochastic, right? You don't know exactly how much wind there is going to be tomorrow or solar. And from moment to moment, it can fluctuate. And you can't really turn it off or on at your own will, right? That's why fossil fuels are still used right now, right? They're used, you can turn it on and you can deal with peak usage or whatever. And that's the thing that is happening, right? Is, well, if you show a company that's profit driven to say, hey, if you just flip the switch here, you're going to achieve your profits, we're asking them to not do that. And so the incentive structures really have to change where it's not, or it doesn't make sense for the large corporations to do that.
Let's hope for the best with the energy transition we are also living,
Yes.
that things, will get better.
Mm-hmm.
So Samuel, to wrap up this episode, we're doing a quick fire Q&A.
Okay.
Because we want to clear up common misconceptions about AI. So I want short answers only.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay, I'll try.
Number one, green AI just mean using renewable energy.
Yes, I think that's pretty close. Yeah, not exactly, but pretty close. The thing that I would add is I think it's about the conversation and about the emphasis of the research and innovation.
Number two, stopping the use of thank you or please with ChatGPT can help reduce energy consumption.
So I don't think so in a meaningful way. I think those serve a lot of people really well. They make machines more personable, which is a big deliverable of AI. So it might seem small, but I do think that I don't think that those are what the problem is.
It was all over the headlines,
Yeah.
few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Number three, if AI help us fight climate change, it must be green.
Nuanced, in the middle ground, right? AI can be used in order to predict weather better, or do a bunch of things better, or design better renewable energy sources. But at the same time, in and of itself, to be fully green, it does need to also itself be properly and responsibly grown.
Finding the right balance. And last, number four, the problem is the everyday use of AI, not the training of the models.
Yeah, so that's the theme of today. I don't think so at all, yeah, in my opinion. The training is the biggest thing that's scaling right now. The usage for serving or the usage for the everyday use of AI, that's just scaling because adoption's growing, which to me is a very, very different type of scaling.
Thank you so much, Samuel. That was a very, very insightful conversation with you today.
Thanks so much for having me.
That brings us to the end of our episode in our special AI series, brought to you by Veolia and Middle East in collaboration with Sorbonne University, Abu Dhabi. A big thank you to Dr. Samuel Feng for sharing his expertise and helping us understand how AI can evolve to serve both innovation and environmental responsibility. Don't forget to subscribe to Veolia and Middle East YouTube channel and follow Let's Turn the Tide on your favorite podcast platform, so you won't miss what comes next. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.